So I thought I'd start off with the first video, trying to enable people to harness the large quantity of information that is already there, but somehow seems to be inaccessible to a lot. At the top, let's say, of this big list of existing coaching materials is or are the lectures and material produced by Tony Robbins. It seems to me that this one person has done more in researching and divulging the psychology of success, but in particular the psychology of those mental biases that keep people in a state of hopelessness, of powerlessness, than anyone else. But when people are given the advice, well, go read or listen to Tony Robbins, the first thing that I hear is, yes, but that's just American woo-woo bullshit, and he doesn't really tell me what I have to do. So this first video is in response to this very, very common and very, very understandable objection. The way I will approach this is by explaining the big difference that is often unseen between simple procedures and iterative processes. A simple procedure is a sort of knowledge that can be codified and explained very precisely in a step-by-step fashion. For example, a math formula. If I put a math formula in front of you, I can explain what all the terms mean and what the operators do, so that then you can go and calculate it by yourself as many times as you please, even substituting variables and so on and so forth. Computer code is another type of simple procedure because things that happen in computer code happen in a predictable, self-contained, compact way, step by step, and it's possible to go in and run the algorithm again and debug it step by step and analyze if anything is going wrong, then what is going wrong. Not only that, but explaining an algorithm is quite simple. You can always point to this particular thing is doing this particular, is having this particular effect on your data, for example. But these are simple procedures. Simple procedures are easy to explain, easy to codify, and people always think that explaining something necessarily means to reduce it to a simple procedure. So when people ask, so how do I make money? How do I start my own business? The type of answer that they're looking for is a procedure. Most of the confusion and the inability to really utilize the wisdom that successful people often put forth very willingly and very openly comes from this misunderstanding. So if this endeavor is not a simple procedure, then what is it? Well, the alternative to a simple procedure is an iterative process. What I mean by that can be best explained by giving examples. Painting is an iterative process. If you ask me, how do I paint a tree? I can show you once, I can more or less tell you what the steps are, but I cannot give you the exact algorithm that is going to allow you to reproduce that same exact tree every single time. In fact, if you look at a professional painting trees, say Bob Ross, his hand is moving in completely different ways each time. So that is what I mean by an iterative process. It's something that you begin to do, and then you see what's coming out of it, and then you adjust. Now, iterative processes have varying degrees of complexity. From the lowest level, for example, peeling an apple. So think of peeling an apple. There's no real algorithm to peel an apple because the exact three-dimensional shape of the apple is different each time, because the type of knife you will be using is different each time, because the human motor cortex and human muscles do not behave like machines. So there's no telling each individual time where your hand is going to end up, what the exact angle with the apple is going to be. So it would seem that peeling an apple is an impossible task because it really cannot be explained. On the high end of the spectrum of the iterative process complexity, we find, for example, making a friend. If you ask me what is the algorithm to make a friend, it's really hard to answer that question. More or less what I would tell you is go out and find people who have something in common with you. But see, if we transpose this to the way in which people seem to interpret, for example, Tony Robbins all the time, why wouldn't you say to that, why wouldn't you give the same answer? That is, well, that sounds like woo-woo bullshit. You didn't tell me exactly what I have to do. You see that somebody telling you this is making a clear statement that, hey, the type of answer I expect is get in your car, drive 10 miles north, turn left 2 miles, get out, find the third house, get in, say these words to these people, and you see that that is absurd. But making a friend is definitely more complex than peeling an apple, because in the end, there is a way in which you can reduce peeling an apple to hold your knife at a certain angle, and then don't cut into it, and don't let the knife get separated from the apple. Keep it just about right, and then rotate the apple. It's not a precise description, but it is some sort of description. With making friends, there's no single algorithm. Making a friend could be accomplished in an enormous number of different ways, and in any situation you could get to the very end and then fail because you lacked one proper, appropriate response. So that's what I have to say for the complexity range of iterative processes. Now you will notice that the more complexity there is, the vaguer is going to be to try to give an answer. So in other words, the higher the complexity of the process and the more vague the answer is actually going to sound, by necessity. Also, the more complexity you have and the more exceptions and case-by-case rules and pattern recognition type stuff that you can only really learn by being exposed to the process, by trying many times, and by seeing it work. So by now it shouldn't really seem like a big surprise to you if when business gurus give advice, it really sounds very vague. Because really starting a business, you're dealing with an amount of complexity that dwarfs making a friend, for example. So the question is, how do you teach this thing? If you cannot codify it properly, if you cannot tell people what to do, when they ask you, yes, but what should I do? You can't tell them. And what do? Well, the best way would be to show them. But the problem is this: to show how this thing works, you would have to see it from the beginning to the end. And that takes a long time for business. I'd say at least 1 to 2 years. And really no one has the attention span of following you, even if you have a friend who's doing this. Who's got the attention span? Also, business requires you to make decisions all the time. You could be making decisions at 6 a.m. in the morning, or between meals, or in a meal. And how is the other person going to witness 24/7 to this decision-making process? So it's really, really hard. But even if you said, okay, well, I'm willing to adopt somebody, so to speak, let them live in my house, and wake them up when I wake up, put them to sleep when I go to sleep, so that they can be exposed to the complete set of decisions from beginning to end. I would be 1 in a billion people who's willing to do this. Because for business, there aren't necessarily teachers. And why is that? Well, that's because teaching is a job, and people who are successful in business don't want to have a job. They might do it for like some kind of social outlet. They might do it because they feel like giving back or giving forward, whatever the fuck. But really, where are you going to find somebody like that who's going to adopt you? So for that reason, really showing it so that somebody can see it happen is not the best way. It's not realistic. So the other way is to speak by metaphors, and that's what everybody does. So all I can do is try my best to give metaphors that perhaps, if I'm good enough at it, might be better than what has been put forth before. And the metaphor I'd like to suggest here is to go through a forest. If somebody asks you, how do I go through a forest? You would say, well, you just get in. So find out where the trees are at. And then you go straight until you hit something. And when you get stuck, you find a way to unstuck yourself and go around the obstacle. And then you repeat it. Keep going forward and repeat it until you're at the other side. You see that this is very different from explaining an algorithm. I can never tell you, go straight for 23.5 meters, then turn right 15 degrees, and so on and so forth. I cannot codify that knowledge, okay? But the problem is most people who ask advice as far as money and business really do expect that kind of answer. And that's why they ask you, but what do I really have to do? Don't give me that motivational bullshit. What do I have to do? You see? They want the meters and the degrees. And an answer like that does not exist. It cannot exist for a forest because it's too complicated to produce. But all the more it cannot exist for a business because the circumstances, the type of business, these always change. So imagine that it's never even the same forest. The land conditions are always different. Impossible to codify. Okay, now that I think I've beaten that corpse to a pulp, I'd like to point out also that education really focuses on simple procedural processes and not iterative ones. So that it's not people's fault, it's not anyone's fault if people by necessity have that kind of objection when they hear the so-called vague advice, because they have been trained for years and years that that is how you learn something, by having somebody tell you all the parts from A to Z and giving you a procedural approach. But education is invested into shaping your mind in that particular way because, first of all, procedural knowledge is very easy to codify, to teach, and to score in a fair way. And also you see that division of labor makes workers more efficient, but at the same time more dependent. Because then you can be a useful monkey knowing everything about one particular thing, but utterly dependent on your company, your corporation, and unable to accomplish anything in the real world because you think that's too strange, that's too vague, I don't know how to do that, okay? Now there's an even bigger problem for people who are in technical fields such as science and engineering, because the subject matter itself shapes the mind for procedural processing. In math, engineering, science, there is one right solution, or at least one best solution. There is an utter need to consider and know and have mastery over all of the moving parts, or otherwise it's doomed to failure. If you build a rocket and fail to account for any small thing, it will burn up in the air or not take off. And so if you're an engineer for a long time or a scientist, this lesson is harder for you than for somebody who's never learned a thing in life. And this is what really keeps most high IQ people behind, and why they're all chained to a desk somewhere working for somebody else. The example, of course, of Einstein and Oppenheimer using their brain to split the atom, which then got used by people who were more business/power savvy to then go and kill a bunch of other people, is just, how to say, the insult added to the loss. Now, as I said, in science and engineering, you need to consider all the moving parts, but the problem is that the real world has infinite moving parts. So it's easy to evaluate and properly assess the response of somebody from a technical discipline that sets out and starts for the first time, for example, to think about, well, why don't I do this? There's a place where I used to work before, and that was my last so-called job, where this banker type dude, this super alpha CFO, called me in, and we were renegotiating what I was getting. And we were doing that often because of the value I was continuing to give to them. And he said, look, you're in a very good position. The only way you can be in a better position is if you find the money by yourself. And by that point, I had really saved massively, and I didn't need his salary. So he actually convinced me that, what the fuck are you doing here, right? But the problem was this infinite moving parts deal. And from my perspective, if I don't have the mastery over all the moving parts, it seems like it's doomed to failure. If a system fails with you not knowing one moving part, then for sure if you have infinite moving parts that you don't even know about, let alone being able to model them correctly, then why even try? It's a huge risk. Or perhaps it's all about luck, which is the other frame of mind, the other useful explanation that thinkers come up with to justify the fact that, well, they're the smartest person in the room, but they're not the richest or the freest person in the room. So, of course, peeling apples is not impossible, and it's not a matter of luck. You can learn it, and it's pretty easy too. And the same is for the same goes for making a friend or getting laid, and the same goes for business. So the best advice that I can leave you with is get started, get some practice at being resourceful. That is really the equivalent of getting some practice at circumventing the obstacle as you go through the forest, so that the next time you hit a tree, you don't think, oh my God, this is hopeless. Just turn around and find your way. And second is keep at it, and it will work eventually. I hope this has been of some value to you. If you know somebody who might find this information valuable, please subscribe, share, tattoo it on your vagina, do whatever you need to do. Peace.